Hello everyone, my name is Alejandro Rondon. I'm a pre-sales engineer in Centreon, and today I want to discuss about how to monitor those remote networks or isolated networks. If you have tried to monitor those networks, you know the challenge. You have limited connectivity, you have strict firewall rules that you have to respect, you have no direct path of communication between the central server and your devices to grab those vitals matrix that you might need. And just because a network is isolated doesn't mean it has to be a black box. You still need the visibility. You just need the right strategy to securely collect that data. So in Centreon, we're aware of those situations, and that's why we like to give you at least two options when you're accessing those restricted environments. You can use either a remote server or a polar. In this video, I'll try to break down all the information that you need from both of them, the pros and the cons, and by the end, I hope that you will have all the information that you need to make the decision on which solution you are going to use, either remote server, polar, or both. So without any further ado, let's start the presentation. So imagine, of course, that you have your central server and you have some networks that you want to monitor. So this can be networks that are isolated, there are semi-isolated, permeable, or other states that you can do. The first option that you can do is you can add a remote server, and that server will access the network where your devices are. In this case, you will only need to open the flux of information between the remote server and the central server with, of course, all the security that you might need. Another option that you can do is you can connect a polar either directly to their central server or the remote server to do the same. Basically collect the data from that network and just communicate between the polar and the central server or the polar and the remote server. Again, simplifying the rules and the firewalls that you need to establish to securely connect that data and restrain information or access to a network. As you can see, the polar and the remote servers can do the same functions. That means both of them have a monitoring engine that it will be able to perform the checks to access the different devices, the information from the different devices through the different connectors and templates that we have. So with that, both of them, they will going to do the same objective. It's important to know the central server also have a monitoring engine, but we discourage to use them in large network over 1,000 of hosts because that will actually impede a little bit the capabilities of the process of the central server. And actually, that's another good point to have distributed architecture like this with polars and remote servers, is because you are going to relieve that charge, that load from the central server of the monitoring directly into those equipments for that purpose. So that's the similitude between the polar and the remote server. They can perform the checks. What about the difference? The main difference between a remote server and a polar is that the remote server has an UI as the central server. That means a user can connect to that remote server and retrieve the data of the configuration or the analysis or the metrics that we are monitoring on a device, on a network, on a group of networks. So that's the main difference. The polar is just going to execute the test and is going to load them up through the central server to have all the information that you might need. So those are the similitudes between both of them. So what are the differences? What are the advantages of using the remote server or the polar? Well, for that, let's start with the remote server. So the remote server, as we saw, includes that local UI. So you have a UI that will be accessed for the local users, the local network, and they can gain a little bit in autonomy, either in the supervision or in the configuration of their host. So that way you can access them, especially if those users cannot access the central server to have a view of the whole network. Another more important thing that you can do is that you can have a central management, because the central server will still have a copy of all the configuration of your monitoring. It will have all the information from all the metrics of the different remote servers or pollers that you have, but you can decentralize the access for your different zones, your different users that you might have, so they can access their information, their local networks. So that's important. That's when the remote server works well for you. The poller, on the other hand, it's the simplest way to access the network. It's very easy to configure. It's very fast in order the configuration. We don't need that much configuration, configuration and communication between the remote server between the remote server and the central server. It's very fast to locate, and of course, since it doesn't have that UI, it's very lightweight, so it requires less resources to accomplish the same information, the same objective, which is, of course, to get the data from those remote sites that you might have. So that's basically the main question that you need to ask. Do your remote users, do they need to access the information, or is just going to retrieve the data from those devices in those isolated networks? So that's the important part. That's the important question that you need to ask yourself. And of course, there's another advantage of using this architecture, this remote architecture, is that you gain resiliency. Why? Because if you lose the contact between any of the pollers and the central server, or any of the remote servers and the central server, those local pollers and remote servers will continue to do the monitoring of their devices. They're going to continue that doing the checks. You're still going to have the communication and all the metrics for those cases. Of course, you're going to get the notification that your communication is down, so you get the alert and you probably fix it very fast. And then once the connection is reestablished, all the data is going to be back into your central server, so you will have it available for reporting, for information, and more importantly, to track all of your SLAs that you may have on the different indicators that you may follow. So that's a very important advantage of using either the pollers or the remote server. And finally, there's another case that you might want to use a remote server, is when you want to do some delegation or you want to distribute a little bit your architecture. This is, for example, when you use the MSP license in Centreon, or where you can have customers of you that you provide them the supervision from their networks, from the different sites, or if you have just a very big company with different views that each of them are going to access the different data from the different networks without having to access other networks or other views. So in that case, you can use those remote servers as delegators to forward the monitoring and the configuration, knowing again that the central server will be the main brain, of course, and will store all the configuration, all the data from all the different servers. And with that, we finish the video. I really hope that you understood the difference between each one of them, and you can now take the right choice when you're thinking about your architecture in Centreon. So thank you very much again for your time, and hope it was helpful. If you want to have more information, you can either check the Centreon official YouTube channel to see more videos from me or my colleagues. You can also go to the community website, The Watch, in which you can actually communicate with us, with all the Centreon team and other customers and other clients from Centreon, about any ideas that you might have for new supervision requirements, or if you want just more information about a specific subject. Or you can also contact us via the Centreon website. So if you wish more in-depth demo or information, or you want to POC, or you want to trial your Centreon architecture, and then you will be contacted with us, the pre-sales team, and we can answer all the questions that you might need. So again, thank you very much for your time, and see you next time. Bye.